So the main question for you is just looking at the impeachment situation analytically from your point of view. There's a lot of noise on both sides. How do you see it right now as it stands? Did the president commit any impeachable offense?
Well, let's start. The answer, as I say it, is absolutely not, and that we have, as has been said, we've defined impeachment down. And I think it is highly destabilizing. We live in a culture of impeachment that was created by Congress in 1978 in the aftermath of the Nixon impeachment, and that culture was embodied in a statute under which I was appointed. The independent counsel was essentially a tool for Congress to impeach the President of the United States. William Jefferson Clinton happened to be the victim. But Ronald Reagan was a victim also, but it didn't go all the way to impeachment. The statute was challenged, here we are at the Federalist Society, by Antonin Scalia in his wonderful dissent, challenging the constitutionality on separation of powers grounds, what we just heard Justice Gorsuch speak about. And he said, this statute is acrid with the smell of impeachment. He got only his vote. I think the Supreme Court was blissfully rising above the fact that Congress had created this powerful tool. This, then, as Bernard Nussbaum, the counsel to President Bill Clinton, said, don't sign this law. It is a dagger aimed at the heart of the presidency. Now, who created the dagger? Congress. Now, bicamerally, and then it had to be, so that created the culture of impeachment. With all due respect to someone who I greatly admire, Bob Mueller fostered the culture of impeachment by fashioning a report that went wildly beyond what he was called upon to do. In the special counsel report, part 2 of his report was openly a letter to Congress saying impeach. So he became, and I wrote a Wall Street Journal editorial after I'd really absorbed what he had done, 447 pages, and I wasn't going to go jump to conclusions, that he was likewise continuing this legacy of the independent counsel that Congress had jettisoned. Now we live in a world where impeachment is simply the tool of expressing our disapprobation of a controversial president. So it has become a political weapon against an unpopular president and a controversial president, as opposed to allowing the electoral process to take its course. To impeach a president means, to me, you need to have the most convincing case that convinces any fair-minded person who's not totally partisan that this president is unfit to serve our great country and needs to be removed now. We're nowhere near that, as I see it. In fact, I don't want to sound like the partisan media, but read the headlines on the one hand, and then read the transcript on the other hand, and you see they're competing universes of what happened with the 3 witnesses thus far. So we have now reached the stage in our history where we are living in the hell that Alexander Hamilton warned about in Federalist 65, which is that impeachment just will bring out these partisan passions. He writes so elegantly in 65 that I would just say, it's time for every American, I would hope, to take a deep breath and reread Hamilton 65 and see, maybe we should just have an election.
You know, I've interviewed some Democrat senators who say, when I ask them what law did the president break, they say there's campaign finance law, federal election law, where you cannot solicit a foreign government for help in any way, and that's what he violated. So do you think they have a case there when they say that?
Technically, I've not seen the evidence that would suggest that. But even if there is such a case, do you remove the President of the United States and overturn an election because of that? It just seems to me a bazooka when a pop gun is called for.
Yeah, because there are other cases that, look, you can remove a president for anything. That's what you've heard some Democrats say. It doesn't have to be a violation of law.
Well,
and they don't like his conduct.
Well, I agree with that. That the matters entrusted to the House of Representatives, and in theory, even though they would be violating the Constitution, the House could. Well, let's take a real example. The indictment, the impeachment of Andrew Johnson was primarily over his violation of a law. The law was unconstitutional. And Johnson probably had an idea, speaking of separation of powers, that the Tenure of Office Act that forbade him from firing a cabinet officer without the consent of the Senate could not be right. And it wasn't, but it took 60 years before the Supreme Court of the United States said that Tenure of Office Act, which disappeared, was totally unconstitutional as a violation of separation of powers. But that was one of the principal grounds for impeaching Andrew Johnson, and he nearly was removed. Now, that was, of course, after the passions of the Civil War. Now we have, in the era of Donald Trump, just people just very passionate about his presidency, the legitimacy of his presidency because of Russian collusion. That has gone away. So I've called what we're experiencing now, and I'll just wrap it up this way. This is impeachment in search of a rationale. There's no clear, compelling, I've called it the John Dean moment, that here is someone who is in the Oval Office plotting a criminal offense. That was enough to cause people on both sides of the aisle to say, Richard Nixon needs to go. Now we know, in another constitutional moment, the impeachment of Bill Clinton, that he was guilty of felonies, but that was not enough to remove him from office. And by the way, one of the grounds that we submitted was abuse of power.
Yeah, and then you have Hillary. I don't know if you saw this. She was interviewed, and Hillary Clinton said there's no comparison between what's happening right now with Trump and what happened with Bill Clinton.
Alexander Hamilton would say, this is making my point. Partisans are lining up, and they're seeing the world the way they want to see it. And I think it's unfortunate. What I've said, including in my book called Contempt, is that there should have been, 20 years ago, a serious conversation when it became clear that the president would not be removed from office on a resolution of censure. To censure him for his violations of law, not for the immorality of the relationship, but for his violations of law.
And that didn't happen.
It didn't happen. There wasn't even a debate.